Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. Today, or actually, maybe what I really should say is Stinky Bucket Fertilizer Laboratory. Or
Is it fertilizer?
it's moving that way. So anyway, we're going to do an update of where our JADAM Liquid Fertilizer is in process for our next year's crop. And so let's go into it and see what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to get a little geeky here about this. JADAM Liquid Fertilizer is really what's called an anaerobic ferment or an anaerobic digestion of biomass. And so what we're doing in our barrels here is we are taking material that is on the farm either as crop residue or things that was wild grasses and weeds and things of that nature. So we have two types. We have a crop residue and we have the grass, wild weed, wild material. And some important points that I think maybe we need to cover about what this process means and how it works. The major difference in an anaerobic digestion or an anaerobic decomposition is that anaerobic bacteria don't create their own heat. And so in an aerobic process, like you're doing in a regular compost pile, what you're going to end up with is bacteria that as part of their metabolic processes generate heat. And that heat can get quite high, actually up to 150, 160 degrees. And as long as you keep oxygen and moisture and have the right ratios of carbon to nitrogen, which usually in an aerobic pile is somewhere around 30 to 35 to 1 is the carbon and nitrogen ratio, you're going to get a really a quick buildup of heat and a quick digestion of the material. In some cases, there have been people who've designed compost piles that are aerobic that have been finished in 20 to 30 days. I'm not going to go into what the quality issues are with that, but the fact of the matter is you can actually decompose organic material quite quickly in a aerobic process. An anaerobic process is different in a sense that it doesn't generate its own heat, but yet the bacteria that really do best are really operating in that same range as we find comfortable, between 60 degrees and about 100 degrees. Some people don't find 100 very comfortable, but let's just say for argument's sake, it's kind of the range where we as humans kind of exist in the summertime. You're going to see those type of temperatures are what will allow the bacteria to decompose the materials in an anaerobic sense quite well. So the point is, the cooler you get in ambient temperature, if you're not supplying heat, the bacterial decomposition process slows down. Okay, the more you get closer to an optimum of somewhere between 86 degrees and roughly 95 degrees in that zone, these bacteria will be rocking and rolling. And realistically in JADAM, what we're doing in making this anaerobic fertilizer, or I should say it's a fertilizer is the outcome, but the anaerobic decomposition is really not much different than a biogas process, because the components that are going into it when they decompose are ultimately giving off carbon dioxide, some water vapor, methane gas, and also small amounts of nitrogen and hydrogen sulfides and things of that nature. Now in an aerobic compost pile, depending on how it's made, it also too will off-gas nitrogen oxides, it will off-gas carbon dioxide, water vapor. The only thing it doesn't do in a functioning aerobic pile is off-gas any methane. The methane, when you're making a biogas, is kind of, that's the product, that's the purpose of what they're trying to do, is they're trying to actually produce methane, and the byproduct for them is the liquid digestate that then can be used as a fertilizer. So really the difference in the JADAM process is what we're doing is our focus is making the fertilizer, and it's not making, it's not about capturing the biogas off of it. So there is some biogas that is leaking out, consistently over time in this. The other thing that is important in an anaerobic decomposition is, besides temperature, is what did you put in it? So as an example, if you put in something that has more woodiness to it, like a dried grass or something that is clearly, senesced and it's no longer green, your carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be a lot higher. This process works its optimum with a carbon nitrogen ratio somewhere around 20 to 1. So think fresh grass clippings. So things have to be, that go into this to do it well, have to be in the active growing stage. They can't be senesced into, or they're straw-like or they're basically dried out. You won't get the same processes because this is primarily a bacterial process. And so it is going to be very, very slow to break down celluloses and tougher things. It won't even break down lignins probably much at all in this process. So important that when you're making the materials in it that you're going for green, okay? And as always, when you're making JLF, what you're trying to do is you also put in your leaf mold soil for an inoculation. And we put in biochar and also rock dust to help moderate the process and keep the off-gassing of things like sulfides and nitrogen gases to a minimum and try to retain it as much as possible in the solution. The other thing, okay, the first two things that we covered, what it is to put in it and the temperature. The best time to make your JLF is probably capturing if you're going on a grass based JLF, you probably want to capture that in spring when the growth is at its best. So you're talking like anywhere from March to June in the northern hemisphere, and kind of think about the same thing in the southern hemisphere from your standpoint. Down there it would be kind of the same thing. You can capture some things in the fall, and it's just going to take longer for it to digest. But the whole thing is, in order to get this thing to its optimum and finish its processes, is going through the summer when you have higher heat is going to speed up the decomposition process and will allow you to get a good finished product probably in 3 months in most cases. The next thing that I think people don't think about too much is pH of the solution. It needs to be, many times when you're talking about grass or you're talking about crop residue, your pH it should be, when it's finished, it should be very close to neutral. Okay, but during the actual decomposition process, you've got 4 stages going on kind of simultaneously. So there's some bacteria that are taking the fresh materials or materials that haven't quite gone through what they call hydrolysis, which is kind of like breaking down the cell walls and allowing the proteins and things to go into solution from your raw materials. And then there's a second stage that's called basically acetogenesis, which what's happening is there's a set of bacteria then that are taking those proteins and sugars and carbohydrates, and it's making it into things that are acid components. And then there's a third stage called aceto, meaning it's making it's taking those acids and making them into acetates, and there's a whole family of chemicals that are in there. And then the final 4th stage is called methanogenesis. Okay, so there's your chemical lesson for today. But after methanogenesis is finished, what's left in your barrel, in your digester, is a clear delineation between what's left of the solids that have not yet decomposed, or the remnants of things that couldn't be bacterially decomposed, and a very rich liquid digestate, that's what the JLF is. That's what you're trying to capture. So these processes, the 4 processes I just talked about, can happen on a simultaneous basis. So temperature will accelerate the process if it's warm and slow it way down if it's cold. So some of the things when you go and you look at the JADAM book is a lot of that's based on Young Sang Cho's experiences in Korea. Okay, well, Korea is like on the 36th latitude, and so that's essentially like if you're in the United States, that's like about Nashville. But if you're in the United States in Maine, okay, say you're on the coast of Maine, or even on the North Oregon coast, where your daytime temps are maybe in the mid 60s to 70s most of the time, and your nighttime temps maybe go down in the 40s, your process in an ambient atmosphere is going to be pretty slow. So instead of saying, looking at the things that are in the JADAM book where it says, oh, 3 months, you may be looking more along the lines of taking 6 months, 9 months, or even a year to go through the entire process.
Or if it's been in the 90s.
If it's been in the 90s, like
for
an example
days.
Here in the Willamette Valley, we've had an exceptionally warm summer, and things are moving along pretty fast. These barrels now have been filled for 3 months, and technically there's probably parts of it that are ready to go, but I know there's still decomposition going on in here.
But weren't you mentioning something that was taking a lot longer is now doing it practically overnight?
That was the JMS. Yeah, the JMS, when we were doing it ambient just a month ago before things really heated up, or actually it's been 2 months now. I guess it was like in the end of May. It was taking close to 50 hours to go through a batch. I made a batch this week and it took 27 hours. And the difference was
90-degree days.
Were 90 degree, 95 degrees during the day, and we'd go down to maybe 68 at night. And so the solution that we were brewing stayed at a pretty constant about 80 to 85 degrees. And so that activated a whole set of bacterias very quickly.
And you had to use it right away.
Well, you usually use JMS within 12 hours of it.
But you weren't planning on that, and you had to use it quickly.
Yeah, I didn't think it would go that fast. So yeah, kind of moved up my schedule.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that's an
example.
So
the temperature does make a huge difference.
Temperature makes a huge difference. And in some cases too, what you got to look at is like, so when you got to put the things into the context of where you are versus like where the book is. So when you look at a book and it says, oh, it takes this amount of time, but you got to realize that the context of where JADAM is located in Korea is a lot like a climate of like Nashville, Tennessee. We're talking about something, their rain is an example also too. By the time their temperatures in the summertime are in the 90s, but their nighttime temperatures are in the 70s. So making an ambient batch of JMS, as an example, will go very fast for them. But somebody who's in Maine, again, like on the coast of Maine, you may actually have to add supplemental heat to get it to go. And even then, you may be looking at 50 to 60 hours. So there's all kinds of differences. And that is important. That comes into play in making the JADAM Liquid Fertilizer too. The only clue that's in the JADAM book that kind of gives you an idea that it may take longer than the stated times is most of the times for brewing, when you look in the JADAM book, it'll say over a period of time. So it says over 3 months or over 6 months.
So like 3 months is the minimum.
3 months could be a minimum, and think of it like you could do a Google search and say, well, what's the climate like in Daejeon, South Korea, which is where he's at? And you could say, oh, I see those summertime temperatures. So now I understand, yeah, his JLF, when he fills his buckets in the spring, his average temperature in a day is probably, between high and low is somewhere around 80. So yeah, in 3 months, his stuff will rock and roll. But my average temperature being Bar Harbor, Maine, is like, I don't know, maybe it's more like 60, in which case that'll greatly slow yours down. So 3 months becomes 6 or 9.
And there's really nothing wrong with it.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just going to take longer. And conversely, if you're in the tropics on the equator and your average temperature day and night is like 90, I'm just exaggerating it, maybe Sahara Desert, assuming you could find any green stuff, it'll go faster. So it's all just a matter of, the temperature plays a role. Okay, the last component that will impact how fast these 4 bacterial decomposition processes go through is pH. So if left to their own devices for a long period of time, they will eventually all balance themselves out. But in some cases, when you go in and test, particularly if the process is still in a young stage, you may see, if you took a pH meter and put it in, that your pH is way down, maybe 5, you know, or something of that nature. If the pH drops really, really far below into the acidic range, it can slow down the last parts of the process of the acetogenesis and the methogenesis could slow down until it starts to rebalance itself. If you're left alone on its own devices, you know, over a long period of time, it'll all even itself out. But if you want to kind of keep it and say, hey, you know, I'd really like to get this fertilizer at a stage where it's pretty useful in, say, 9 months or 6 months or even 3 months, you can kind of goose it a little bit by putting in some calcium carbonate. Now, you can do that with really fine grind limestone, or if you're really cheap, just take your eggshells, which I have a pile of them here. These are just dried out eggshells, and just crush them up. The eggshells will gradually dissolve into the solution. You don't need to put in a whole bunch, or even like in a 50-gallon barrel here, we're probably talking about adding maybe a cup of eggshell into it. And pretty quickly, within a few days, the pH will start coming back up. And once the pH starts coming back up, the rest of the last parts of the process will start kicking back into high gear, so particularly if your temperatures are okay. So to recap, the important things on making JLF is A, get the material in a 20-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Try to get it as young and green as possible from things that were vigorously growing. And that could be pruning from crop residues, grass and weeds. Second, you want to make certain that your temperature, you got to realize the cooler you are, the longer it's going to take. Maybe if you're in a cool area, putting your barrels in a greenhouse is a good idea, because your summertime temperatures in a greenhouse can be higher, which will keep it going. But just remember, the cooler it is, closer to 60 you are, the longer it's going to take. And the last item is your pH. Okay, you'll know when your material is done. The level of odor will decline, and your pH will be very close to neutral. What we're going to do is we're going to open up our barrel on our grass crop residue. I took the hold down ring off already. He's going to pass out. No. This barrel has been running since the 1st of April, and today is, 5th of August or so.
First week of August.
First week of August. And one of the things that we also do, or I do, is occasionally, meaning it's not on a religious basis, every week I do something. It's more like I hit it at least once a month or maybe twice a month, depending if I remember to do it. I'll come in and I'll take the lid off and I'll just stir things around, because a little agitation, we're not trying to introduce oxygen and all this kind of stuff, but obviously a little bit will be introduced. But it's kind of the idea is during this process, sometimes gases and stuff from the decomposition can get caught underneath the solids remaining in your digestate, and we'll force it up to the top. And what I try to do is just kind of like mix it back up and evenly distribute it. It kind of helps get the process stirred along. So when we open the top here, it's got a little bit of suction to it. We may see stuff that's pretty close to floating to the lid, and yep, there it is. Okay, so we took the lid off, and you can see what happened is the solids from the grass kind of floated up to the top, but there's actually probably a lot of liquid underneath this. It's kind of spongy. One of the things that I would recommend before you really get into handling this kind of stuff is just get yourself a little pair of gloves. Because honestly, if for some reason some of this stuff gets on your hands, it's kind of stinky stuff. It takes a while for it to get washed off. So I'm just going to wear these.
Don't cook with those hands.
It's actually not as bad as you think. I mean, yeah, it's got a smell to it, but this is a pretty well ventilated area. And
Full disclosure, on my opinion, it smells like an outhouse or a porta potty.
actually, I was kind of thinking along the lines of like steer manure, but
No,
okay.
I'm afraid it's going to splash me.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is slowly push this cake of stuff that's on top, and you can kind of see the bubbles coming up. See, there's definitely gases trapped underneath this. So the idea is that we want to get this material down below, back into the solution. Yeah, and you can actually still see some of the grass, you know, in terms of its structure. So, but the liquid digestate is really, it's coming along pretty nicely. Our target is to be able to use this stuff on our anemones and eventually the ranunculus this fall, and also on our snapdragons as we need it. But most of it's actually going to be used next spring on our seedlings. And it should be really good shape by then. You can see the bubbles coming out. This is all the gases that were trapped underneath that layer. Actually, this barrel was stuffed full, and when I get finished pushing this down, what it's going to end up being is, at this point, it's probably going to be at least 70% liquid. So it's a matter of just kind of getting all those oxygen or bubbles of gases and things out of it. As I push it down, it's kind of circulating. I'm not trying to get this to the point where I'm, you know, stirring it up and introducing a lot of oxygen. I'm just kind of pushing it down to get it, you know, into the solution and get the trapped gases out from underneath it. For the most part, it looks like I've pretty much got it. Okay, the two things we're going to do is we're going to take a pH rapid test, and just to see where it's at. And if it's really super acidic, we're going to throw in some of the crushed eggshell. If it's not, we're just going to, you know, if it's still like in between the 5 to 7 zone, you know, in the 6s, I'm probably just going to leave it alone, let it finish up its thing. And then we're going to check the temperature of the solution. Right now, the atmospheric temperature is 80. So we'll see where the barrel is. It's right, what, midday right now, roughly. So the first thing I'm going to do is check my pH. Now look at that. She's right on neutral, which means we're moving along really well. That's great. Let's check it. It could vary in different parts. Nope, still neutral. One more check. Looks pretty close to neutral. What do you think? Neutral?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll say it's neutral. All right, so there isn't anything we need to add to this guy. It's perfect. So now we're going to check the temperature of the solution and see if we're running, you know, better than atmospheric. And we'll just stick that in. It'll take a minute or so. Well, it looks to me it's moving up a little bit, but not terribly much. Looks about like 82 degrees barely. So that's pretty good. So it's going to continue to move on. There isn't anything more we need to do. So this guy's fermenting along nicely, and so we're just going to put the lid back on and then put our steel ring back on, and leave it alone again for another, maybe I'll check it again in September sometime. And that's it. That's all we need to do to that. Now, as a final thing, what I kind of wanted to show you folks was what the JADAM Liquid Fertilizer looks like of the things we did in 5-gallon buckets, last fall. We've used a lot of it, particularly the grass one, but I can show you kind of what, when it's finished, this would be after 9, at this point, almost 10 months since it was made, and on the grass one, and then almost, I think we did that one in October, so we're 2 months off. So yeah, it's pretty close to 10 months on the marigold zinnia one too. So we're going to open those buckets up and just take a look on the inside and see what the difference is between what you saw in this and what you see in there. Okay, so the first bucket we're opening here is, this was the grass based fertilizer we made, and what's left is we've harvested just about all of it, and as you can see there isn't much left, but you can see what the solids look like. You can still kind of see it looks a little bit like grass, but honestly it looks like just a big old cow pie.
Yeah, or sludge.
Right. Now, do you smell anything really horrible out of it? No, and that's the thing is...
Either that or my nose is dead.
No, I can stick my nose in this and it doesn't really have the odor that it had before. Remember when we opened it up last spring and you went, oh, whoa.
Yeah.
That's gone.
That doesn't smell.
So this has completely finished its fermentation
There's
process.
no liquid in it at all.
Well, there's a little bit left, you know, if you really wanted to squeeze it out. But now...
So what do you do with the sludge?
Okay, we leave it in here. Okay, and we made this from fall-based grass.
Right.
And so when we get our first flush of rain, again, and the grass will... if the grass will flush up again, and we're going to fill it again.
Over the sludge?
Yeah, over the sludge. And then we'll put layer it in, you know, with some biochar and rock dust and, you know, compost soil, just like we did, just, you know, enough to inoculate it. But this is actually an excellent inoculant down on the bottom. So when we add more material into it for the next batch, right? And this bucket was stuffed full of grass,
right?
And what you're looking at down at the bottom of the bucket is maybe 10%.
Oh yeah,
left. Now, there will reach a point after you do this several times that your residue will build up and you will have to kind of like haul it off. And what I would do with that is I would put it into a regular compost pile and just let the thermophilic process finish it off, you know. But at least for another 2-3 batches, we'll just keep adding to it. So that one looks, you know, really well. And again, the smell is gone, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Now we've got another guy here. This one is the marigold and zinnias, and we did a video on that. I think it was last October.
Right.
And we've harvested some of the material, at least half of it out of here. And now this one's still got a lot of liquid left in it. Okay, what you can see is, okay, wow, but look at that dark, see that dark material right there? Mm-hmm. That liquid right there is your fertilizer.
Cool.
And that's what we use now. When you punch this down, you can still see there's at least 2 gallons of liquid left in here. And we've been using this to fertilize our zinnias and actually other flowers like celotias and stuff like that. Do you smell anything in the bucket?
No.
Nope, it's gone. See, this is 10 months fully decomposed. And so that's kind of what we're aiming for these guys here is by the time we really delve into these big guys will be next spring, and we'll have at least 10 months behind us. It'll have gone through a warm summer and hopefully a moderate fall, and the material should be excellent. So once everything is all covered up, we really don't get any kind of odors in here at all. I mean, I suppose if you go and you stick your nose right next to it, you're going to get a whiff. But it doesn't attract flies, and it doesn't really smell, and it just sits in here by itself, and it just keeps, percolating away. And like I said, maybe once a month or so, come by, give it a stir or poke down, check the pH. If everything's rocking and rolling, just leave it alone, let it go. So
but if everything's closed up, why did I just get a really strong whiff?
Probably from these guys over here, and the pole over there
the pole
still
stinks.
has some stuff on it. I haven't washed it off, so
okay.
As the breeze goes by that thing, you'll probably smell it.
Okay. I just got a big strong whiff, and I'm thinking everything's closed.
Yeah, no, it's not coming out of these guys.
It's the pole.
Yeah, it's the pole that I was sticking in there, and sorry. But anyway, so that's kind of the basics of it. Again, is the longer this stuff can ferment, the better it is. So in this case, these materials here have been excellent for the last several months. Once they got to about, for us, about 8 to 9 months, they were just, it's been primo stuff, and it's worked very well on our glads, on our Sweet William when we were fertilizing them. It's working pretty good on the celotias, and I think it did a pretty fair job on the Lisianthus too. Those are the things that we've been experimenting with it on. And what I have also found too that I think is important is the ratios you use are really, you got to be careful, because this stuff is pretty strong stuff. And particularly, I mean, there are people who will use the JLF before it's, had a long time to ferment. And technically, since all those processes I talked about, those 4 steps are kind of like all simultaneously happening at the same time, within a few weeks of processing, particularly if the temperatures have been warm, you can get some nutrients out of it, but the nutrient level will continue to increase the longer it goes. Now, particularly, once it got to this point where there was really no odors coming out of this thing at all, that means they were done. It means pretty much the bacteria got everything it could get, and the liquids in it are pretty rich. We dilute 200 parts of water to 1 part of fertilizer. And that has kind of been our standard of what we've been using, and we've been getting pretty good results with that.
Have you been using it on the pumpkins?
Yes, that was the other thing we did. We used it on the pumpkins, and they really are starting to rock and roll. We planted them about a week to 2 weeks later than we did last year, but
they're catching up.
They're catching up fast, and they're really looking big and green and strong. So we'll throw some pictures in there, and you can kind of see what they look like.
And have you been using it on tree replenish?
Predominantly for that experiment with the crabapple tree
and our maple
tree, I have been using the JMS. Although I have thrown in on the crabapple tree in the last month and a half, I've been mixing in a 1 to 200 dilution of the grass-based JLF, and actually it's putting out new growth, and this is August, and it's kind of like wild. It's like maybe I stoked something I shouldn't have stoked. I don't know.
So we're also you said you were gonna maybe do it with the filberts.
Yeah, next year I'm thinking the next step we have to do, I mean, this year was kind of like proving it to ourselves and how to use it, and so that we don't damage plants, and that we're actually getting the response from the plants we want to get. And I think we've kind of got that dialed in. So our next step is to get figure out how to apply it through our drip irrigation systems, and do that such that it doesn't clog things up and gets the nutrients where they're supposed to go. So there are some great tips in the JADAM book about how he accomplished that in Korea. And I think, that'll kind of be a model for, how to go with that. But yeah, we're going to have to get some form of injection system going and filtration system, because there are, once you go into drip, you gotta have it probably down to like 150 or 200 mesh almost. I mean, you gotta be pretty small to keep things from clogging up your emitters. But you probably don't have to go to that level of filtration if you're running it like in an overhead sprinkler type situation, or you're running it through a hose of some kind. So there's all kinds of different ways, and those are the things we got to work on next. Okay, so we started out, we experimented using the Homer buckets. It gave us small amounts. It was great to experiment with. We moved up to the 55 gallon guys, and these are going to be the guys we're going to be using into next year. And most probably, if we start applying it to everything we're doing around here, we're probably going to need another set of 2 more 55 gallons. So probably for us to do what we need to do, we got these guys from Uline, and they're really high density polyethylene. So probably 2 more 55 gallon brewers to use, so that we can, our system has to be that we have to capture the good stuff in the spring, let it ferment through the summer and the fall so that it's ready to be used the next spring. That's kind of the thing. So we're probably going to have 2 sets going, like one we're using out of and one we're building on.
Right.
So that's why we're going to end up with basically 4 jugs, a 4-jug system, to kind of keep it going that way. And again, you know, for us, I think it's going to be very important that we brew this stuff through the summertime and into the fall. That heat is what's going to be driving the decomposition process. In the wintertime, there isn't going to be a whole lot going on. It'll be very, very low and very, very slow. And then in spring, it should be aged out. The decomposition should be finished, and we should be looking at some primo stuff.
So you kind of need to get your supplies, your new barrels and buckets and stuff, if you want to get on schedule to do this.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, at least for us. Okay, this is what works in our context. If you're in an area where you got year-round heat, you know, like you're, you know, a tropical area, probably doesn't matter as much, but we have to orient our system to capture the heat of summer to drive the process.
Didn't you also feel like there was a lot of biomass here that you kind of felt, wow, if I'd only had a bucket to put it in?
You know, what happens is you start looking around and go, hey, I could just, you know, throw that in a bucket.
Yeah.
Hey, you know, and pretty soon, next thing you know, I go, well, I don't need, you know, 1,500-gallon tanks, so.
But need an extra bucket.
But we do, we will do, yeah, the bigger guys here. And then once we finish these guys off, we'll probably just do this for experimentation purposes. But mostly our production is going to come out of the big guys.
Right.
So anyway, folks, just wanted to give you kind of an update about how the JLF process is working here and what are the important things to make it successful. I know this video is a little long, and I want to thank you for hanging in with us. And
we're being really nerdy.
yeah, stay safe out there, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.